Hey team, and welcome to another video in the Astrological Magical Elections video series. In this video, we're going to talk about the magical electional opportunities that are available to us from the Capricorn Solar Eclipse on December 26th until the Cancer Lunar Eclipse on January 10th. So, fun times. It's fun times. So because we're dealing with an eclipse this cycle, a solar eclipse in this instance, but even lunar eclipses, when it comes to eclipses in magic, we have to make sure that we're following our first rule of eclipse magic. And our first rule of eclipse magic is, don't you do it. Now, there's really no good reason to do any sort of positive, beneficial, or growth-oriented magics during eclipses. Eclipses are almost always times of negativity and destruction and toxicity. So trying to take that energy and create like a supercharged talisman of it is pretty much always going to end badly. Now, eclipses do have their uses. They're used for more malefic type magics, for cursing and destroying, but we typically try to stay away from that kind of practices here. So I don't really talk about it very much and just kind of generally avoid eclipse magic or eclipse things as much as you possibly can. So with that being said, we're going to move on into our magical elections for this 2-week period, and we have 3 that we're going to talk about, 2 lunar mansions and 1 planetary. So our first example, our first magical opportunity is going to come to us on December 28th in the early afternoon, around 2 p.m. my time here in this chart. And this is going to be for a talisman for the 24th mansion of the moon. Now, the 24th mansion is one that I believe we've talked about before. It's really kind of one of the more fun ones in my opinion. And the 24th mansion is really about multiplicity and fertility. So kind of our key points when we're doing the election is we're focused on the moon here at the very, very end of the mansion. The mansion ends at like 8 degrees and 34 minutes, so we're getting really close there. And the moon is also applying this conjunction with Venus. So we have the moon angular in the mansion and applying to a planet that can help us affect the business, because this is a very kind of feminine multiplicity, very feminine kind of fertile energy. Having the conjunction with Venus is actually it's very positive. It's very symbolically appropriate, so that's good. We want that. One thing that we want to avoid, and why we've kind of pushed this time back, is that we're trying to keep this Mars opposition from the ascendant as far away as possible. So kind of keep Mars, back. If you want to push this chart back to say like even an earlier Taurus ascendant, we can absolutely do that. You can push it back, that's fine. Just to keep this Mars further from the opposition of the ascendant degree. That's totally fine, we can do that. And of course, we're always worried about what's going on with the ruler of the first house, because we have Taurus rising, we're focused on Venus, and Venus is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, kind of getting closer to the square with Mars in about 15 degrees, but far enough away to where we don't really have to worry about it at this point. So this is just a really nice selection for the 24th mansion. And I mentioned before that the 24th mansion is one for multiplicity, and in the traditional texts, it says that the suffumigations, the incense, the offerings to the 24th mansion are like bull's horn or ram's horn. And the idea is that you're kind of giving up or offering whatever it is that you're trying to get whatever it is you're trying to get more of, right? So, if you obviously were a farmer back in the day and you wanted to have more oxen or more cows, you would use cow's horn. Or if you wanted more sheep, you would use ram's horn, that kind of thing. Today, we don't really, focus much on livestock, even though that's totally possible if that's something that you're in the business of. But for instance, maybe you make a talisman out of a $20 bill or something like that for increased finances. It can also be used a little less literally, and you can use it for like increased opportunities, or like if you were self-employed for more commissions, or more consultations, or more sales, kind of anything like that. And for that, if that's what you're going to do, I would recommend either printing out like an old commission email or like an old sales receipt and making the talisman on the back of that. As a way to kind of key into that symbolic energy as a form of like sympathetic magic more directly. So there you have the 24th mansion. I definitely recommend using it. It's sort of our very own like video game item duplication glitch. It's a really fun one to work with, so definitely recommend that for anybody who's needing that kind of assistance. So our second example is going to be for a Mars planetary talisman, and it's actually one that I'm a little mad at because it's not something that I'll get to participate in or create, because as it so happens, this chart is only valid for those of us who live in Mountain and Pacific time. So for that half of the country, congratulations. For the rest of us, we're going to have to miss it out. This chart here is actually set for Denver, so for those who are in that area, you're going to want your chart to look like that as much as you can. So of course, when we're doing planetary talismans, you want to make sure you have your 4 pieces. The planet the target planet, the planet that we're trying to make a talisman of, in this case Mars, needs to be in a sign it does well in. So it's domicile or exaltation. Here we have Mars in Scorpio. That's good. You want that planet to be as angular as possible on the midheaven or on the ascendant. Here we have Mars in Scorpio conjoined the ascendant, so that's good. You want it to be the planet's day or hour, and at this time it's actually both. It's Mars's day and Mars's hour. It's in the early morning hours of a Wednesday, and of course with planetary days and hours, they don't go to the next one until sunrise. So just because it's after midnight on a Wednesday doesn't mean it's Mercury's day. The sun has to rise first. So even in this point in time, it's still Mars's day, and it's Mars's hour during Mars's day. So that's good. And then our final piece is you want the moon to immediately apply an aspect to that planet. And that's what we get here. The moon will immediately apply a trine to Mars in Scorpio. So that's perfect. We have all four of our things. We want to make sure that planet isn't debilitated or afflicted, and the sun it's not close. Mars is not close enough to the sun to be combust, which is good. And it's not in a difficult aspectual relationship with Saturn, which is also good. Now, the reason why, say, Denver or the Mountain and Pacific time zones are able to use this chart and why Central and Eastern are not is because if it happens too early, if you're too early to this, what you'll actually get is you'll get the moon applying a sextile to Saturn before it gets to Mars. And so our big points to watch out for when we're doing this talisman, or when we're trying to make a Mars talisman, is you want to make sure that Mars is close to the ascendant and that the ascendant has not switched over into Sagittarius. So if you kind of want to know like what your leeway is for this, what the election window is, it's any time after the moon separates from Saturn and before we switched over into a Sagittarius ascendant, because then what happens is when we switch to Sagittarius ascendant, we're always focused on Lord of the first house, how well it's doing. So when the ascendant is in Scorpio, we're focused on Mars, and we already know Mars is doing well. But when we go to a Sagittarius ascendant, we switch over to Jupiter, who is not doing very well. Jupiter is in Capricorn at sign of fall. It's close to the node, which may or may not be a bad thing, depending on your viewpoint of that, and it's close enough to the sun to be combust. So Jupiter is definitely not doing well, and you don't want Jupiter to be the ruler of the first house and significator for the individual that the talisman is for. It's better just to keep it as Mars as much as we can. So definitely keep that in mind if you're going to make this talisman. So our final opportunity is going to be on January 7th at around 8:18 p.m. for my time, kind of like the late evening hours. And this is an election for a sixth mansion of the moon talisman. And the sixth mansion is one that I don't think we've ever talked about before. I think this is the first time I've had an opportunity for it come up. And this is a mansion that's more relationship focused, love, marriage, courtship, that kind of thing. It's more long-term relationship oriented. So keep that in mind if you want to work with it. It's not especially sexual. There is another mansion that is more explicitly sexual in nature, but this is a good talisman to make if you're looking for, a long-term relationship or looking to repair one, or, something like that. It's more, the traditional text, the Pickatrix is more like, to repair love between man and wife. So it's kind of got that kind of implication mixed in with it. It's a way of strengthening an existing relationship, but I don't see why you wouldn't also be able to use it in order to seek out a long-term relationship. So keep that in mind. And of course, whenever we're talking about like love or relationship magic, we always have to have that kind of ethical conversation about like free wills of other people. So I don't necessarily recommend making this talisman as like at a target, like at a specific person that you want to be with, unless of course you're already in a committed relationship with somebody, in which case it's probably fine to focus that on them, especially within the context of helping to strengthen it or to resolve some issue or to be able to understand one another better. Then that's perfectly okay. But I think the kind of general attitude is if you're making like a love talisman for like make this person specifically love me, that's probably treading onto some murky waters there that I don't necessarily recommend treading off into. One other point I want to make about the Sixth Lunar Mansion is that its image is very heteronormative. That's just a product of its time. But that image isn't going to serve those of us that are not in heteronormative relationships. If you're not a man in love with a woman or a woman in love with a man, then its image is not really going to help you that well. It needs to be sympathetic. So make sure to alter the image to fit your relationship reality. Looking at the election for this talisman, you can tell that it's different from my normal ones. Usually I want the moon to be very angular, right on the midheaven or right on the ascendant. And here she's deeper in the 10th house, still angular, but not right on the angle like I usually try to have her. And that's because I wanted to be able to manipulate the ascendant better, to get a better lord of the first house. So if you were to do this chart when the moon was right on the MC, you would have Virgo rising, which would make Mercury the ruler of the first house, and Mercury is of course combust, being this close to the sun, and you don't ever want a lord of the first house to be combust except for very specific circumstances and in a very specific way. So we didn't want that. So by pushing the moon further back into the 10th house, we were able to keep a Leo ascendant, and that makes the sun the ruler of the first house, which is much easier to work with. Of course, the downside for this is that the sun is conjoined Saturn, which is a little bit of a downer. Of course, this can also be used with a little bit of a different spin to make the relationship that you're looking for or whatever a bit more committed or serious. So if that's something that you're wanting, then that can definitely be used for that appropriately. So of course, as with every Lunar Mansion talisman, we're focused on what the moon's next aspect is, and here the moon will apply a trine to Venus, the natural planet of relationships and love, so that's important. And Venus is also in the 7th house of the chart, the house of relationships and marriage, which is very nice. I don't normally place a whole lot of focus or attention to the house that the planet is in, but it's always nice to have that symbolism reflected in the house if possible. So I think it's a very nice bonus in this case. So now, when we're talking about the window, the electional window, there's not a whole lot that we're really worried about missing. Keeping Venus in the 7th house is nice. So if Venus falls out of the 7th house, then you probably don't want to really focus on that time very much. Try to get it while Venus is still very much in the 7th. You don't really want the Virgo ascendant. So everything else looks pretty good. You do have the moon kind of separating this wide opposition from Mars. It's about 10 degrees out. So if you want to kind of keep pushing the moon a little bit further and further away from that, that's totally fine. But there's not just a whole lot to mess up this chart, so it has a pretty big window. All right, well, those are our 3 magical election opportunities for this 2-week period: 2 lunar mansions, 1 Mars talisman. I always really look forward to doing the waxing moon phase videos more than the waning moon phase, just because you have more that you can do in the waxing moon phase, so it's a bit more fun. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all my patrons who have supported this series, and I'm looking forward to producing more projects in the future, so stay on the lookout for that. I hope everybody has had a happy holiday. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody again on the Cancer Lunar Eclipse, and as always, when it comes to the eclipse magic, please don't do it.